the Parker Kingston situation is one that's very, very interesting and obviously has a lot of interest in it. And I understand what the interest is because all of us are looking at it through the prism of, okay, this alleged incident, and let me be very clear right up front, Parker Kingston maintains the assumption of innocent until proven guilty because that's the American legal system is set up that way. But he has been charged with felony rape stemming from an incident that stretches back to February of 2025. So a year ago, around this time, is when this alleged incident went down. Now, a lot of people, and it's been mainly opposing fan bases, but there have been some Cougar fans out there as well who have essentially kind of brought up the topic of, okay, how did BYU not know about this for almost a year? And how did it get swallowed up? How did it get buried? Was it a cover up? All the different things that seem to come up when stuff like this happens at BYU. And I understand why it exists because let's be very clear. BYU is a university that's owned and operated by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. It has an honor code that's quite stringent. It requires its students and student athletes, in this case in Parker Kingston, to abide by a standard of living that obviously stands out from a lot of what the rest of the college, I guess, scene has in it. But it's a very interesting dichotomy here because the Salt Lake Tribune went and did a lot of research on this. And there's Courtney Tanner from the Salt Lake Tribune wrote this story, and that the BYU situation in terms of who knew what and when they knew it was because this incident allegedly occurred down in St. George, Utah last year. It was in a completely different jurisdiction. It didn't happen at BYU. It didn't happen on BYU campus. So therefore, according to what the Salt Lake Tribune is reporting here, the reason why BYU and their coaches, university officials, all the like, had no idea of what happened is because this was being investigated by St. George Police and not BYU Police, Provo Police, or anybody in and around where BYU is located. It was hundreds of miles to the southwest. And that is where it kind of brought in the dichotomy of, okay, well, this is a pretty horrific situation. And how did BYU not know? Well, simply because they didn't want BYU to be tipped off to this. They didn't want Parker Kingston to be tipped off to this because they were doing as thorough an investigation as they possibly could do. Now, there was a court hearing earlier this week with Parker Kingston and his legal representation. They have actually asked for an expedited preliminary hearing to actually be moved up to next month. It was really slated for April, but they have said, hey, we're ready to go and get this thing going. And it's actually going to take place. There'll be a hearing on March 18th. And then the preliminary hearing is currently slated to be held on March 23rd. And then at that point, he could be bound over for a trial in the incident here. So the whole thing about what I'm breaking down here for you guys is to understand that while your favorite fan base out there, whether you are a BYU fan or otherwise, BYU didn't know. And the coaches didn't know. And surely, I think had they known, they would have taken action long before this went down. Parker Kingston is really the only person who can tell anybody why he did what he did. More importantly, why he held this to himself. Because according to this, the BYU Police Department, they did learn about the allegations against Parker Kingston in November of last year, the week, I believe, November 24th, which is when BYU was getting ready to play UCF in the regular season finale. But the reason why this was not passed along to BYU administration is that because the alleged crime, this is right here, S. Daniel Carter, the president of Safe Campuses LLC, says the alleged crime occurred in a private residence in St. George. Therefore, there was no requirement for any internal university reporting statistics or timely warning or Title IX response, unquote. It happened out of the jurisdiction. It didn't affect the greater campus community. So therefore, that's why it was essentially kept with BYU Police. Now, they did serve a warrant to get the cell phone from Parker Kingston in November, but then it says the BYU Police Department was ultimately restricted by state law governing the sharing of information in an active investigation by another agency. This is not BYU Police trying to cover for Parker Kingston. It's not BYU trying to cover for him either. It is literal state of Utah law. It's on the books that they were helping out with the investigation that St. George Police were conducting, and that's where it stopped. There was no taking it to Kalani Sitake. Maybe could they have done that? Sure, but they'd be literally breaking the law had they done that. So that is why BYU, I think, as swiftly as they acted, well, they acted swiftly because at that point, there was almost a year into this investigation. He's obviously had been arrested at that point because the BYU police and Provo police were asked to apprehend him. He's now facing felony charges, and it's really blown up. And he's obviously been dismissed from BYU. He's also been dismissed from the BYU football program. And now we await the trial process and to see how this legal process plays out. So a lot of people want to claim that they know what's going down and what's what and how things went down and who knew. And you know what? Facts are facts. And I appreciate the way that Courtney Tanner and the Salt Lake Tribune approached this. They just essentially went step by step. Okay, here's why BYU Police, it stops with BYU Police. It says, they have a part here, when did BYU Police get involved? It said in November of 2025. It says BYU Police spokesperson Karen Ellingson specified on November 24th, at the time St. George Police wanted to serve a warrant to seize a cell phone belonging to Kingston and asked BYU Police for help. Officers collected and delivered the phone to St. George Police, and that was where that stopped at that point. Then obviously come just a while back here in the month of February, then they serve a warrant to arrest him. That was obviously served by Provo Police. He's taken into custody, and now we're gearing up for a trial to play out here, and we'll see what happens. I appreciate the fact, like I said, that the Tribune kind of just went, like I said, step by step and kind of laid out here what happened. There's no nefarious stuff going on with BYU. This is not BYU trying to cover for a star athlete because that's just not BYU style. I'll be very blunt. BYU is a university that obviously, being affiliated with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, they had their druthers. They want nothing to do with anything of this variety, nor should they, nor should anybody, quite honestly. It's horrific stuff. But the situation is that BYU and BYU Police did exactly as they essentially were bound to do by state law. So I appreciate the fact that BYU Police, which have found themselves in hot water at different points in the not too distant past, they did things by the book and according to the book. And now it appears we'll find out what the ultimate outcome is in due process, because obviously the trial will play out, and we'll see what Parker Kingston, what the jury of his peers ultimately determine whether he's guilty or not. But this is a very, very interesting, touchy, and quite honestly, just a sad topic. But I also at the same time appreciate the fact that the Salt Lake Tribune took the time, very methodically went through this and just kind of laid out exactly what you should expect and can expect as a BYU fan. I know that the Tribune can obviously have a bad rap among BYU fans because of some of the stuff they've written in the past. But in this case, they nailed it. Credit to them because they did the work. They went out and did legit reporting on this, and it'll be very interesting to see ultimately where this plays out. But props. Got to say, just props to Courtney Tanner, the Salt Lake Tribune, for doing what they did here, because I think it really lays out exactly what happened. And people I've talked to about the situation, BYU legitimately had no clue. And like I said, Parker Kingston, he is really the only one that can, if asked, I'm sure, I don't know, I can't speak for him, but he'd be the only one as to explain why he didn't take it to his coaches or take it to BYU administration. He held on to it himself, was trying to deal with it himself, apparently. And now we're at where we're at. And obviously we'll find out whether he's guilty or not guilty. And then obviously things will move forward from there. But once again, this is very, very good reporting from the Salt Lake Tribune and kind of lays out exactly, BYU, by and large, in terms of the BYU's coaches, there was nothing nefarious. They weren't trying to cover up anything because they didn't know. Flat out. They had no idea until recently, and obviously took very, I think, direct and deliberate action as soon as they were obviously in on knowing what exactly happened with Parker Kingston. All right, so there you go. Hopefully that makes sense. I would encourage you guys, go to sltrib.com and read the story. Like I said, it's very straight out. It's not slanted in one side or the other in terms of its reporting. It's right down the line reporting. And I appreciate the way that the Salt Lake Tribune handled this situation.